现在网上关于台湾问题的大量内容，其实都在刻意引导你相信一件事：台海战争不可避免，而且美国必须介入。你会不会觉得这听起来很熟悉？但今天这段视频直接把话说透了。所谓的战争风险根本不是自然形成的，而是被不断放大，甚至被人刻意制造出来的。更关键的是，他点出一个很多人不愿面对的现实：台湾问题从来就不是什么两个国家之间的争端，而是一个中国内部尚未完成的历史问题。可偏偏有人非要把它包装成国际冲突，甚至不断往里面加火，递刀制造对立。问题来了，如果没有外部势力的持续介入，这件事真的会走到今天这一步吗？让我们看看这位外国小哥是怎么说的。
There's only one resolution to the conflict over Taiwan. While China is surpassing the United States as the world's largest superpower, the US is desperately trying to maintain its control as the global hegemon. As an inherently militaristic nation, warhawks in the US are looking to hold on to their power by launching a war against China while they believe they can still defeat the country. The most logical way they can justify this war against China is through the island of Taiwan. Western media has manufactured your consent into believing the idea that war over the question of Taiwan is an inevitable conflict that the United States should definitely be involved in. They've hammered this message into the minds of your parents through news stations like MSNBC and Fox News. And if you're watching this video, you've probably heard it from YouTube channels like Real Life Lore, Wendover Productions, and Johnny Harris, who are practically begging to start World War III and end the world. These people look incredibly stupid pushing this narrative because it's built on the false idea that the US and the West are defenders of freedom, democracy, and a so-called rules-based order. In 2026, the true nature of the West has been laid completely bare, and the notion that these countries uphold those values is utterly ridiculous. The contradictions of Western liberal ideology have reached their breaking point. Taiwan might just be the US' desperate bid to drag the world down with it as its empire crumbles. In today's video, I'll explain how the US is not defending Taiwan, but is actually the biggest threat, not only to the island's safety, but the entire world's. I'll explain how Taiwan is not a country, why the mainland won't invade Taiwan unless provoked, and finally, explain the only rational resolution to this conflict and a 4-step plan on how to achieve it. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Taiwan is an island located just 100 miles off the coast of mainland China. A very brief history of the island is that it was populated by indigenous people before being colonized by the Dutch from 1624 until 1662, when they were ousted by a Ming dynasty general. The island was quickly taken over by the Qing dynasty in 1683, who ruled the province for 212 years until 1895, when Japan launched the first Sino-Japanese War and was ceded Taiwan as a colony in victory. Once World War II ended in 1945, Japan was forced to cede all territories it conquered back to China, including Taiwan. This ruling party was named the Kuomintang, or KMT, led by a military general named Chiang Kai-shek. Right after World War II ended in China, the country was re-engulfed in civil war between the communist forces led by Mao Zedong and Chiang's ruling KMT government. In 1949, Chiang and the defeated Republic of China forces fled from mainland China to Taiwan. Mao intended to cross over to the island to finish the civil war, but was stopped because of the United States' threat that they would use nuclear bombs on China if they did so. This was the start of the United States utilizing Taiwan as a military base and outpost in Asia against China and communism broadly. With the backing of the US, Chiang set up a military dictatorship on the island and claimed that they were the one true China. To this day, they claim all of the mainland as their territory, including additional territory claims that even the current day PRC doesn't claim. As a result of this unresolved civil war, there were two governments claiming that they were the one true China: the People's Republic of China in Beijing and the defeated Republic of China in Taiwan. The United States recognized the Kuomintang as the official China, and the government in Taiwan also represented China in the UN and its Security Council. This lasted until Richard Nixon and Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger's visit to China to open relations with the country to counter the Soviet Union's influence. As a result, in 1979, the United States shifted its recognition of the true government of China from the breakaway Kuomintang government in Taiwan to the PRC in Beijing. At this same time, the United Nations also recognized the PRC as the only legitimate representative of China to the UN and expelled the ROC. This is the basis for what is called the One China policy, where to have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, you must accept Beijing and the PRC as the one true government of China. To this day, the United States and nearly the entire world recognizes the One China policy. Since the vast majority of countries on Earth adhere to this policy, Taiwan is not an independent country, nor is recognized as the official government of China. The ROC government may have de facto control of the government on the island, but has no de jure independence, meaning that it is not a country according to international law, formal agreements, and international recognition. I can go into my backyard and claim it's my own country, make my own passport, and administer my own currency, but all of it is meaningless unless it is recognized by the international community. Here's a map showing which countries recognize the government in Taiwan versus the PRC. As you can see, it's just about the entire world. There are only 11 countries out of 193 on Earth that recognize Taiwan, and they make up 0.48% of the world population. These countries are almost exclusively small nations in Latin America and tiny island nations in the Pacific that only recognize Taiwan purely because they were bribed by the United States so that it wouldn't literally be the entire world not recognizing Taiwan. The United Nations frequently reiterates that according to international law, Taiwan is a province of China. They are listed at the Olympics as Chinese Taipei. The IMF lists Taiwan as a province of China. The United States' own official policy and on the State Department website recognizes the government of the PRC and states that there is only one China and Taiwan is part of China. Taiwan is also very clear. It doesn't claim to be an independent country, but simply the true government of China. When looking at the opinions of the population and their preferences for reunification, independence, or maintaining the status quo, only a small minority want to declare independence, and a similarly small percentage want reunification as soon as possible. Polling data over the years consistently shows that the overwhelming majority of people on the island prefer the status quo. If Taiwan was to ever declare independence, it would immediately trigger a war between the mainland and the island. Beijing only tolerates a contested government under the umbrella of a uniform Chinese country with governing disputes, but Taiwan becoming a breakaway secessionist state is a red line. This idea of Taiwanese independence and identity separate from mainland China has really only been a creation of the last 20 to 30 years and has been largely manufactured by the West in an attempt to destabilize China. When Taiwan was handed back to China from Japan in 1945, there was no mention of independence because it was never a thing. For decades after the Civil War, the residents of Taiwan had no question or hesitation that they were Chinese people and part of the same shared cultural heritage. This is only natural as they have the same history and were a part of China for hundreds of years, sharing the same culture, ethnicity, language, food, religion, holidays, and identity. Since Chiang Kai-shek died in Taiwan in 1975, his body has not been buried to this day because he insisted on being buried on the mainland of China after reunification, and as a result would be appalled at the idea of a separate Taiwanese identity. Ironically, this has led to the mainland government being the ones to preserve his legacy, largely for his fight against the Japanese. His hometown on the mainland has even become a large tourist attraction. Chiang's KMT party, an historical rival to the CPC, has become the pro-China party in Taiwan's legislature and advocates for more dialogue and cooperation with the mainland because it is firmly committed to Taiwan's Chinese identity. The whole idea of a separate Taiwanese identity only really began to change in the 1990s with the election of Chen Shui-bian and the Democratic Progressive Party in 2000. This party, commonly known for its green color, is a U.S. proxy that serves U.S. interests at the expense of the Taiwanese people. The main platform of this party is being anti-China and secessionist. Their platform is to win elections based on fear-mongering and demonizing mainland China, and actively risking dragging Taiwan into a war to win elections and appease foreign interests. They want to shut down all dialogue and diplomacy across the strait and antagonize the mainland by buying billions of dollars worth of weapons from the military-industrial complex in the United States. They work directly with United States NGOs like the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, and Open Society. These NGOs' stated objective is to take on the previous role of covert agencies from the US, and they directly fund Taiwanese politicians to advance US interests. Prominent DPP politicians have direct links and received trackable funding from State Department institutions like the NAD and Open Society. The current president, Lai Ching-te, proudly does the complete bidding of the US. Lai really wanted to cover his bases with US interference, so I'm sure you guys will be happy to know that this past October, Lai was very proud to be the first to welcome APAC to Taiwan. Literally an American lobbying group between two fully separate places. In their meeting, he promised to deepen strategic partnerships, invest in advanced tech, and cooperate with the defense capabilities that are so famous with these relevant parties.
Taiwan is well versed in advanced chip manufacturing and is very willing to enhance cooperation with Israel.
Just in case you guys weren't convinced of what the DPP's existence is for and what their values are, this collaboration was a perfect representation. To manufacture a separate Taiwanese identity, the DPP completely altered the school curriculum and textbooks, using historical revisionism to erase their Chinese identity. They've even gone as far as whitewashing Japanese colonial rule and World War II history with Taiwan, removing the word colonization from textbooks and replacing it with governance. Textbooks even say Taiwan cooperated with Imperial Japan during World War II, which is an incredible revision and downplay of atrocities like massacres, comfort women, forced labor, and cultural suppression. But many in Taiwan are pushing back against this politicized historical revisionism, like the Taiwanese YouTuber History Bro.
从历史的角度来看，把中国史跟台湾史分开来教学，导致一个很严重的问题，就是台湾史的脉络变得非常的破碎。你无法理解台湾史为什么是这样，因为当台湾人在了解台湾史的时候，受到民进党把这个课纲修改之后，它的结果就变成说，他对世界不关心啊。
In historical terms, and in all philosophical terms, there is no separate Taiwanese identity except under the overarching Chinese identity. And if Lai Ching-te keeps telling the people in Taiwan that they are not Chinese, tell them if they are not Chinese, what are they? Are they descendants from the Netherlands? I told many people in Taiwan, I will be able to trace all the ancestral tombs of the Lai family in China. So this is the reality.
There is, however, a real Taiwanese identity in the indigenous people native to this island. Tragically, their populations were decimated by killings, land disposition, and forced language and cultural assimilation carried out first by the Japanese and then the KMT. The Han Chinese population of Taiwan today is over 95%, where the indigenous population now represents around 2.5%, which is a very similar percentage of the population of Native Americans living in the United States who faced a similar decimation by their government.
现在目前的论述，很多人说，台湾人是独立的民族或是独立的什么？不好意思，目前台湾人的主体是汉人。如果一个人他不是台湾原住民的话，以目前的政治论述来说，他是没有资格讲他自己是台湾人，因为我们都是汉人。大部分台湾目前的所谓本省人都不是本省人，真正的本省人是原住民啊，就如同美国人在屠杀印第安人的时候，然后堂而皇之的把美国人冠在自己头上是一样的道理。就说把这些人口全部干掉了，以后主体就变成我人。所以这个我觉得还是主要台湾现在的问题啊，这才是真正转型正义要讨论的事情。
As a result, the secessionist movement today has nothing to do with this ethnic aspect due to the fact that 98% of the current population are not indigenous. In addition to changing the school curriculum, Taiwan's media is also captured by US and Western propaganda. The United States has spent $1.6 billion in anti-Chinese propaganda, specifically targeted overseas and crucially in places like Taiwan. They are just as subject to the drip feed of anti-Chinese propaganda as we are in the West. This doesn't just come from outside media, but also direct US interference into Taiwanese media. Taiwan has their own de facto state newspaper, the Taipei Times. A Canadian former staffer who worked there was shocked at just how direct the US controls Taiwan's narrative. He outlines this in his article, American Hegemony, the Real Obstacle to Taiwan Peace, and he reported all of this despite himself being against mainland China's perspective on Taiwan. He describes how the US and military-industrial complex directly manufactured Taiwan's consent for war by laying out copious amounts of anti-China propaganda and inevitable war messaging to advocate for a continual flow of US weapons, even including calls for nuclear missiles.
As a copy editor, you're just bombarded with all of the messaging every day. And I just realized I didn't see it so much as pro-independence as pro-American and pro-military. In the Taipei Times, some of the editorialists are a guy named Miles Yu, he was a senior advisor to Mike Pompeo under the Trump administration. Eldridge Colby, who's a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy. Richard D. Fisher, who's a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center, which Wikipedia has said that the center undertakes classified work on behalf of U.S. government agencies. Ryan Haas, who's the director of the China Center for the Brookings Institution, which is funded by the Gates Foundation and J.P. Morgan Chase. And so these are the types of people who are littering the op-ed pages of the Taipei Times. Very pro-American, former American officials, and they're all saying, yes, the only way for Taiwan to beat China is to buy more American weapons and to restock against American weapons and to fight against the Chinese aggression. But when I looked at all these tensions that were happening between Taiwan and China, it always seemed to be provoked by something that the U.S. did. It was most notably Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. That's what really crystallized something for me because I thought there was no reason for her to visit here. She just stopped over for 19 hours. She wasn't here for a full day. There were no trade agreements to be signed. There was nothing important to be discussed. She came for no reason except to provoke China. Even aside from that, it was just like every day, every couple of days, there was some article about some arms deal or how Taiwan needs to sign an arms deal or how someone in the U.S. Congress is supportive of Taiwan on this arms deal. And it's just like, oh, come on, give it a break. There's other means happening too. The United States involvement that's always provoking any tensions between Taiwan and China. When you take them out of the picture, they seem to get along.
Due to the dominance of a one-sided narrative in the media, a politically motivated, historically revised curriculum, and heavy reliance on Western social media and applications, many Taiwanese have developed a deeply distorted view of mainland China, the United States, and the broader West. Of course, China has its own propaganda. Every country does, but most Taiwanese aren't even exposed to China's perspective at all. Chinese propaganda about Taiwan cannot be compared to that of the US. China's is rooted in historical, cultural, and international legal claims with the ultimate goal of a peaceful reunification. On the other hand, US propaganda is violent, based on lies, and aimed at spreading fear, division, and selling weapons, potentially even pushing Taiwan towards a world-ending war. If you see these as equally harmful objectives, I don't know what to tell you. From 2008 to 2016, during the last time the KMT government was in control in Taiwan, cross-strait relations were beginning to flourish. There was an unprecedented amount of dialogue and cooperation opening up between the mainland and Taiwan. There were university exchanges, loosening of travel restrictions, and deep integration of economic ties. There was even a historic meeting between Xi Jinping and the then leader of the government of Taiwan at a summit in Singapore in 2015 to negotiate further peace and trade agreements. As a result of this massive momentum, US efforts to undermine the peace process went into overdrive, funding and organizing opposition groups through the heavy NGO presence on the island and heavily pushed an anti-mainland China media campaign. As a result, the DPP regained control in 2016 and immediately adopted a strategy of fear-mongering. They cut off all dialogue with the mainland, purchased weapons from the US, and attempted to remove pro-diplomacy politicians. Additionally, they made it incredibly difficult for mainland Chinese to visit Taiwan. These policies have persisted to this day, creating massive barriers to exchanges and communication across the strait. As a consequence, military provocations and the threat of conflict have increased dramatically. No matter how you feel about Taiwan, you cannot support this. The prior dialogue is an objectively better relationship and what we should all be striving to recreate. The DPP and US were terrified of what happens when there's actually dialogue and open exchange because the DPP won't be able to win elections based on fear and the US would lose its puppet. They know that if there was a truly open and fair exchange environment that they couldn't control, then unification would be inevitable. The identity and culture are the complete same and the geopolitical winds are completely in favor of China. Support for independence is largely based on easily debunked misconceptions about both mainland China and the United States. Even with near total control over the narrative, the pro-independence camp can only muster a small minority of support within Taiwan. This is why I don't view the pro-independence argument as an immovable, strongly held position. Take a look at a quick snapshot of people's thoughts about the mainland.
用一个字或两个字，你这么会描述中国大陆？
封闭 ，very good， 繁荣富强，我爱大陆，大陆万岁！
民主自由的国家，共产，
保守，
专制，
蛮有趣的，漂亮，
mysterious，
独裁，
商机，神秘，
酷，
不自由。
就是他们食物很多元。
那个里面的人很好，但是政治很腐败。会很讨厌的，他只是不允许我而已这样。
就是他们经济其实很强。直接 traditional culture 还好。
现在的情况是惨、腐败，抖音很厉害。
nightmare 比较传统。
新
决策很快。
是人治的国家，不是法治的国家。领导人因人而异吧。好的领导人，他们就日子过得好；不好的领导人，他们就日子就过得不好。
There's still an incredible amount of misconceptions from Western propaganda, and they are purposely kept in the dark about the real situation on the mainland. Even so, most people have generally positive and curious feelings about mainland China. Among the majority non-aligned, more indifferent population, there's infinitely more room for movement towards the reunification camp. Once foreign influence is removed and the people of Taiwan are able to freely engage with the mainland again, the island's majority would inevitably favor negotiation, ultimately leading to a peaceful reunification arrangement that benefits both parties. But still, let's take a look at the valid concerns Taiwanese have about reunification. The most valid concern of some Taiwanese is the fear that in a reunification between Taiwan and the mainland, mainland China would not accommodate the political and cultural differences that have developed during the years of separation. But of course, the unique aspects of Taiwan would 100% be accounted for during any reintegration. China has been through this same process before. Despite all the misinformation and efforts to derail the process, the one country, two systems plan for the reintegration of Hong Kong from British rule in 1997 was incredibly successful at bringing the city back into China while incorporating the local differences after 99 years of British colonization. If you're skeptical or would like to know more, I made an entire video breaking down Hong Kong that you can check out after this. China has shown flexibility not only in Hong Kong, but in opening the entire province of Hainan Island to a unique governing system with visa-free travel, zero tariffs, and a fully open internet. But in effect, any agreement with people living in Taiwan would have little to no changes to their lifestyle. An arrangement could theoretically see Taiwan still hold their own passport, currency, local flag, and access to Western internet in a system like Hong Kong. It is in mainland China's best interests as well as completely logical to do so. Even the major aspects of the island's current political system could remain intact. The real debate of the entire Taiwan question should be in these details within a unified China framework, and it is fully possible for this all to be resolved in an acceptable manner for both parties. This could range from significant political integration and adoption of mainland systems on one end of the spectrum to the other end, where Taiwan joins China in a Commonwealth-style system, maintaining very high levels of autonomy in local political governance. In any arrangement, however, Taiwan would abandon any elements of secession and fully integrate in international bodies and other key aspects of sovereignty. The most important red line would be no secessionist leaders would ever be able to take power and a full abandonment of Taiwan as a separate entity from China. People living in Taiwan would also see numerous benefits from reunification, starting with a massive boost in tourism, both from mainland Chinese visitors visiting Taiwan and Taiwanese visiting the mainland. Economically, they would also join the world's biggest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, leading to more job and university opportunities. But most importantly, reunification would offer a profound reconnection with their cultural heritage. Many families are still separated by the conflict, and Taiwanese would no longer be left in a lingering gap with their identity. They would finally have the opportunity to reconnect with their ancestral tombs, homes, and lineage. When I visited Taiwan, it was honestly bizarre seeing their interaction with Chinese history. It's presented in this strange, convoluted way where they're proud of their Chinese culture and traditions, but have to experience it in this weird gray area because it's so politicized. None of that was more obvious than in their National Palace Museum, which has just a ton of stolen artifacts they took from the mainland when they lost the Civil War, and they have to goofily present this stuff as somehow distinct from the mainland. Most Taiwanese are already proud of their Chinese heritage, and by unifying, they can fully connect with their roots instead of having this convoluted identity. The majority of the population wouldn't lose anything from abandoning their Taiwanese identity that is supposedly independent from China because they were never convinced of it in the first place. They would only stand to benefit from unification. Remember, they already speak Chinese, celebrate Chinese holidays, eat Chinese food, have the same history, have massive economic integration as mainland China is Taiwan's #1 trading partner, and they are 95% ethnically Han. Really not that hard to sell at all. But the craziest part about this is, while the question if mainland China would accommodate Taiwanese political differences is by far the most valid concern, it is the least mentioned by the minority pro-secessionist camp. The adamantly pro-secessionist forces do not source their grievances against reunification or the mainland from valid concerns, but to their perceived connection to the Western neoliberal project and a deep psychological prejudice towards China. The Taiwanese and Westerners who are anti-China the most are consistently the most bad faith actors who see themselves aligned with US domination and proxies around the globe. You will often see these three flags together and see them commonly touted by Western media that these are the biggest defenders of the Western-led world order, which we all know to be very flawed. As a result, unsurprisingly, the arguments from this minority independence camp are much more bad faith and fragile. Shockingly, a very large sentiment from the anti-unification camp is a belief that the mainland is less developed and the quality of life there is much worse than in Taiwan. Mainland China being less developed from Taiwan was certainly the case 30 years ago, but it's an insane insertion to make now. China has provided a middle-class lifestyle that is on par with Europe for upwards of 700 million people, and the most highly advanced technology in the world is being produced in China. Yes, of course, there are still poor regions in the mainland, but the difference is these people's living standards are guaranteed to increase in the coming years, and there's great optimism about the future. Compare that to Taiwan, the EU, US, and East Asian countries like Japan and South Korea, where living standards are stagnating or falling. When I talked to some Taiwanese living in Shanghai before I visited the island, they said that Taipei looked like Shanghai 20 years ago. This notion of the mainland being underdeveloped will fade away in the next couple years as mainland China's technological and quality of life improvements will be too undeniable, but right now this camp still clings to this idea. This is especially insane when a download and quick 20-minute scroll of Chinese social media like Xiaohongshu would completely wipe away this notion, which goes to show just how important it is to the West that Taiwan uses their social media platforms. I often encounter from the adamantly anti-mainland and pro-independence crowd a deeply ingrained false sense of proximity to the United States, the West, and whiteness. A significant part of their reasoning stems from the belief that they somehow belong to this club that includes the United States, whiteness, and in a more twisted way, their former colonizers in Japan, which allows them to form a false sense of superiority to their perceived inferior counterparts on the mainland. I think that it should be perfectly clear by now that white people don't make exceptions for anyone and can still be incredibly racist to Asians. This has always been the case since the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camps, COVID racism, and this current administration witch hunt against all Chinese in academia. They also could care less about your distinction as someone from Taiwan versus a mainlander or Hong Konger. They are all the same to white people, and it is a stupid and futile attempt to try to gain white approval. Despite all this, you'll often see anti-mainland Taiwanese placing the highest value on anything associated with America. And a significant part of this mindset is the desire to conform to the Western ideal. The rabid attacks on China are not sourced from any political or economic concerns about Taiwan, but purely using their disdain for the mainland, which represents the Chinese identity. They use this as a virtue signal to white people that they're willing to throw their identity under the bus to gain an ounce of approval. They should be incredibly proud of their 5,000 years history and continuous rich culture that has existed longer than any on Earth. It's a lot easier to come to this realization than trying to fit into this white or Western identity, which has repeatedly shown it doesn't care about them and will never accept them. Obviously, my analysis speaking to the Chinese or Asian American experience can only go so far as a white dude, so I highly recommend that you check out other diaspora Chinese YouTubers who speak to the importance of never losing your identity and that being proud of your heritage is by far the best path to happiness rather than trying to fit in and conform to Western white ideals. One of the largest talking points about Taiwan is that it's a shining beacon of democracy, but this has never been the case. The battle between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong wasn't a battle between communism and the West's idea of democracy. The KMT government represented the interests of wealthy elites and landlords from major Chinese cities and US-backed anti-communists. The soldiers in the army were either non-ideological recruits or people who had been abducted and forcibly conscripted. There was little to no widespread support for the party or liberalism amongst the general population.
Unlike the nationalists, the morale and fighting spirit of communist troops were high. They were winning, and they knew it.
There was even still large support for communism in KMT-controlled Taiwan after the war, and it was squashed through what was called the White Terror that lasted for decades and saw thousands of leftists tortured, killed, and disappeared. As mentioned earlier, they didn't have their first presidential election until 1996. Even in its just 30 years of elections since then, calling the island's government a healthy democracy is a reach. If I asked you whether America's two-party system, where power constantly shifts between Democrats and Republicans who hate each other and immediately undo each other's work, is a sign of a thriving democracy, would you say yes? Democrat or Republican, do you think we have a healthy democracy that represents everyone's opinions? Obviously, I'm guessing 99% of Americans watching this video would say no. Okay, well, it's the exact same situation in Taiwan. No other party has ever led the government besides the DPP and Kuomintang parties. Does it make it vibrant and dynamic just because it's Chinese? Their legislative branch frequently erupts into insane shouting matches and even physical fights, and Western media loves to present this as a cutesy, vibrant democratic process, but in reality it's just the same polarized bullshit spectacle we have in the US. There's also rampant corruption throughout the whole system. The first president of the DPP, Chen Shui-bian, was arrested and sentenced to life in prison for massive corruption and embezzlement charges in 2008. Recently, in October 2025, the DPP led a recall campaign to oust democratically elected KMT lawmakers, clearly retaliating after losing control of Taiwan's legislature. They claimed that the 24 KMT lawmakers had colluded with the mainland as a pretext to remove their opposition. However, the campaign backfired spectacularly, with all 24 recall attempts failing, with a majority of voters rejecting them. This couldn't be more ironic coming from the same party that's presenting itself as the defender of Taiwan's democracy. The Western narrative that their system is the best and the only way to govern is falling apart. Across Western countries, governments are consistently unpopular and ineffective and are rolling back rights everywhere, from Germany, Canada, the United Kingdom, and especially the United States. They're hitching their identity to a sinking ship of a rigid idea of democracy, which will only continue to unravel in the years ahead. Mainland China simply has a different form of democracy called the whole process people's democracy, which is objectively outperforming Western models and is consistently more popular. It doesn't rely on division, short-term thinking, but actual accountability and meritocracy. As a result, according to polling from Western universities like Harvard and other Western international institutions, respondents in China consistently are satisfied with their system and view it as much more democratic than those respondents in the West and in Taiwan. Mainland China also consistently ranks far above other world countries, not only in their own perceptions of democracy, but in trust for their government. This is not because they are lying or because they're forced to do so, but because China was one of the poorest countries on earth 40 years ago and is now the biggest economy on earth measured by purchasing power parity. People can see direct, tangible benefits in their life, and things get better year after year. Mainland China's system is perfectly suited for Taiwan given their shared collectivist, Confucian, and Chinese cultural heritage. But despite all of these facts, as we mentioned before, Taiwan wouldn't necessarily have to completely adopt the system and could keep a majority, if not all, of its local governing aspects if it still desired in any reunification arrangement. Now, as stupid as it seems when discussing the internal affairs of China, we have to discuss the US pivotal role in this conflict. But before we discuss America's role in this, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you can, please check out my Substack, Twitter, and Patreon. Thank you guys so much, and back to the video. The United States is inseparable from this discussion, as is the only reason Taiwan is separated from the mainland today. The United States bankrolled and supplied the KMT and Chiang Kai-shek for years, so much so that his nickname from American officials was Cash My Check, because of his constant requests for funding during the fight against the Japanese and later the Communist Party. When Mao Zedong defeated the nationalist forces on the mainland, he was already planning to cross the strait and finish the Civil War before stopping under the threat of nuclear annihilation from the US. Whether it would have been an extended campaign or a quick foldover from the remaining KMT forces, who saw the writing on the wall in combination with the existing communist sympathizing population on the island, Taiwan would undoubtedly have been fully incorporated into the People's Republic of China. Instead, it became a base for American imperialism, stationing soldiers and nuclear weapons miles away from China and other East Asian countries to threaten them over the crime of pursuing their own economic system. Nuclear war enthusiast General Douglas MacArthur described Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier due to its crucial location for controlling sea lanes and projecting military power in the Pacific. During the same time in the 1950s, the United States invaded Korea and killed upwards of 2 to 3 million civilians in bombing campaigns that destroyed up to 80% of all structures in North Korea, leaving literally no targets left for American bombers. The United States also launched an illegal, pointless war in Vietnam, resulting in 2 million civilian deaths and the sound defeat of American forces. Leftists today in the United States will be entirely against U.S. intervention in Korea, Vietnam, Venezuela, Iraq, and Palestine, but turn their brain off and cheerlead the Cold War-era logic and encirclement of China through imperial outposts like Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. To this day, the island still plays this role by being a massive client for the U.S. military-industrial complex and political pawn for the U.S. Mao Zedong, when speaking in 1965, said, "Israel and Taiwan are bases of imperialism in Asia." You are the front gate of the great continent and we are the rear. They created Israel for you and Taiwan for us. Their goal is the same. Leftists will champion the cause in the Middle East, yet support the complete opposite forces in East Asia. The US could care less about the people living on Taiwan. The reason behind any potential war would have nothing to do with the concern for them or their best interests, nor would it have anything to do with any supposed ideas of freedom or democracy. It would be purely a war to maintain US hegemony and reason to attack China. In the meantime, US politicians are demanding Taiwan spend 10% of their GDP on the military-industrial complex. They are selling these weapons not to defend Taiwan, but to milk them as a vassal state for billions of dollars with overpriced US weapons that would have zero impact in any conflict. The US can't even deliver any of these weapons without massive delays, as a batch of 60 military jets, for example, I'm not joking, ordered 7 years ago in 2019, have yet to be delivered. These systems always come with extortionate maintenance and software fees to lock them into years of payments. Taiwan's role in any conflict wouldn't be as a partner, but as a battering ram and cannon fodder. US officials expect Taiwanese to be sacrificed until the last man and woman on the altar of US hegemony, just like the US is sacrificing an entire generation of Ukrainians to advance its strategic interests. US politicians say this themselves all the time.
Most important thing we can do to strengthen ourselves relative to China is to see Russia defeated in Ukraine, because they're allies, and Russia being weakened weakens their ally China. I mean, so and by the way, being able to take an amount which equals what, about 5% of our military budget to help the Ukrainians is about the best national defense spending I think we've ever done. We're losing no lives in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are fighting heroically.
Look how gleefully he proclaims it's the Ukrainians and not the Americans who are dying for the US. That's exactly what they want for Taiwan. These are the same people who axed peace talks on several occasions to ensure war continues at all costs. Is that really what you want for the people living in Taiwan? To be the next Ukraine?
The United States government, the security state, first of all, doesn't care about Taiwan. I'm sorry to say it. It cares about its competition with mainland China. The people who lead the United States, in my view, are maniacs. They're irresponsible. They think that this is a game. They play a game, but who suffers are the people on the ground. Ukrainians have lost perhaps 600 or 700,000 dead, and hundreds of thousands wounded. And they're losing on the battlefield because of the game that the United States started to play 30 years ago. Now the United States is doing the same with Taiwan. The United States has a grand strategy, if one could call it that, although there's nothing grand about it and there's nothing wise about it. The idea is bother China, badger China, weaken China, scare China, divert China. And we must control Taiwan. There's a problem, though. Taiwan is not America. Taiwan is not an independent country. Taiwan, according to both the PRC and the ROC, is part of one China. And the United States absolutely is provoking. It's meddling. It's unilaterally sending weapons by the billions of dollars now to Taiwan, as if the PRC would say, well, we're going to send weapons to Mexico because not to Mexico, to Texas, I meant, because we don't like the situation between Texas and the rest of the United States. It's mind-boggling. The United States should not be sending billions of dollars of weapons to a part of a country that it doesn't even have diplomatic relations with, because in 1979, the United States said there is one China, that is our policy, and there is one government that represents China vis-a-vis our relations, and that is the People's Republic of China. All of this is to say, the U.S. is playing a game. It's a dreadfully dangerous, misguided game. I hope people in Taiwan understand, my God, I said it to the Ukrainians, do you really want to be the Afghanistan of Europe? And I would say to the Taiwanese, do you really want to be the Ukrainians of East Asia? The answer is absolutely no. Be careful. Be careful. The United States cannot save you. In fact, all it can do is get you destroyed, because Taiwan will be safe and secure if the United States stops its provocations. This is the irony of the whole situation. Ukraine never had to be destroyed the way it is, and Taiwan can remain safe because mature, grown-up people across the straits on both sides have reached a consensus in the past and can reach a consensus going forward on peace between the two sides. These are two very mature places. These are two places of a shared history and culture, and both need and want peace. And if the United States doesn't put its nose into it, peace actually will prevail across the straits.
Yeah. Listen to the infamous Henry Kissinger quote. To be America's enemy can be dangerous, but to be America's friend is fatal. Example after example shows where this path of trusting the US leads you. Despite this, DPP leaders in Taiwan are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. The extent they go to bend over for America, especially during the Trump administration, is truly pathetic. Here's a video of President Lai Ching-te celebrating with his supporters over the US imposing only a 20% tariff on Taiwan, which is a tariff rate much higher than the deals of regional competitors like Japan and South Korea.
Taiwan just signed what, in my mind, is a modern version of an unequal treaty with the United States. Although you wouldn't know that listening to the ruling DPP. They're actually calling it a home run. That's what the premier says. The vice premier, Chen Li-jun, she was a lead negotiator. She's celebrating this as if she just won the Academy Award or something. She went as far as to say, I just want everyone to know, after this trip to the United States to negotiate supply chain cooperation, we proved the strength of Taiwan's technology and industrial sectors. Our hard work has made us into a critical force in the world. What she failed to highlight in her long self-congratulatory declaration of victory is the hideous cost to Taiwan. Her team signed away in order to get Daddy America to hurt us just 5% less. Yes, that's right. The deal she brought home, the tariff has been dropped from 20% to 15%. That's it. And what did she give away in order to achieve that results? $500 billion. Yep. Our whole GDP per year is only around $900 billion. So by committing to a $500 billion investment, that's half our GDP. This is just absolutely sickening. I did the math, and if you divide it up, that's about 22,000 US dollars for every man, woman, and child in Taiwan. That's the amount of capital instead of investing it in Taiwan. That's going to the US instead. 250 billion of that is going to be in private sector investments, pretty much TSMC going over to America to build those mega cluster chip fabs. And yes, they are going to be transferring cutting edge technology. And to put insult on injury, isn't that supposed to be a silicon shield? Isn't that what the DPP has been saying for time out of mind, which is that it is our edge in semiconductor production that is supposed to be keeping Taiwan safe? I want to remind everybody that Taiwan is the only source for these very high-end chips in the world. And the US AI industry, which is pretty much the only companies holding up the whole entire US stock market these days, are completely dependent on the steady supply of these chips. So objectively speaking, it should be Taiwan that has all the bargaining power, right? What are we doing here? But not only are we agreeing to transfer it to the United States, the cost of the transfer is going to be done on our dime. That's like, imagine a bandit coming to your house to take your most valuable belongings, but instead of taking it with them, they're saying, well, we want this, that, and the other, pack it up nice and send it to my house. Don't break anything. So this is a staggering, historically bad deal that Taiwan is getting.
On top of that, during Trump's inauguration, the government in Taiwan sent a delegation to Washington to attend Trump's swearing-in ceremony and were completely snubbed and denied entry, while the People's Republic of China's vice president was welcomed with open arms to the event. Despite the US clearly not being able to care less about Taiwan and ritually humiliating the island, the DPP remains loyal to the US. America would also drop them in a second if they became inconvenient to support. Just as the United States doesn't care about the well-being of the people on the island, they could also care less about defending the ideas of freedom and democracy. Hopefully this should be perfectly clear to you by now, as this has become completely masked off in the past 2 years. This is not even mentioning the hundreds of covert regime change operations aimed at overthrowing democratically elected governments that chose socialism or opposed the US. The United States will work with any regime as long as it supports its interests. Democracy is completely irrelevant. They were completely aligned with Taiwan for 40 years while it was a military dictatorship. It clearly didn't care about democracy then. In the modern day, the US provides military assistance to 73% of the world's dictatorships.
If it was a military dictatorship and it had TSMC, would we really be talking about it? Like, no, I don't. And I'll be honest too, I don't care if Taiwan is a democracy or not. It wasn't, when it originally was founded. Interesting poll. Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? We have to defend it because it's a democracy. Like, who cares? Sorry, it's all about whether we get the chips or not. That's it.
Okay, so we can all agree that the US could care less about Taiwanese well-being or the values of freedom or democracy, then there is zero way that you can support US intervening in the matters of the island whatsoever, nor support surrounding China with military bases. The fact that the US doesn't actually value these ideals are not some minor nuance or disagreement. This is the foundation to the justification of US involvement in not just Taiwan, but the entire region, and it's a complete lie. If some random country across the world like Bulgaria or something decided that it alone has the right to militarily intervene on behalf of the internal affairs of a country across the planet, you would be like, of course not, who the hell are you? Okay, well, why does the US being the country change anything? When you strip away all these notions of the US being morally superior, all you're left with is blatant warmongering to support hegemony, because that's exactly what it is. You don't even need to make the left-wing argument. How about the right wing? Why should we be sending billions of dollars to places across the planet and potentially even US soldiers? This does not serve the interests of the entire US population outside of like 5 weapons contractors and neocon psychopaths. It's literally none of our business. There's a presumption in the West that China is preparing to invade Taiwan by 2027. This is not based on any official Chinese policy statement, despite constant insistence from US military officials, arms contractors, and think tanks. This myth originated from a misinterpretation of a document that simply referred to increasing military preparedness. Supposed China experts in the US who can't speak the language and have never been to the country consistently misunderstand and misinterpret China to fit their narrative. Beijing has never announced any plan to reunify Taiwan by force. For decades, it has explicitly stated that it would only consider this as a last resort. Xi and other top officials directly denied any type of plan during a summit in San Francisco. Remember, this idea isn't even based on supposed US intelligence. They continue to say it as if it's China's stated policy, despite being directly told it's not. Now, it's being spoken about as an inevitability by warmongering politicians, YouTube channels, and military officials. The 2027 deadline was just invented by the US to justify its insane war budget and extort more money and concessions from its vassals in Asia. The military drills the mainland conducts around Taiwan are always a direct result of provocations from the DPP in spending billions of dollars in military equipment from the US or statements flirting with unification. If you are truly concerned about the safety of Taiwanese, then you should be advocating for the US to stop moving up the escalation ladder by selling weapons and coaxing separatists, instead of using the response the mainland does to these provocations as justifications for moving further up. The United States in the same situation would never tolerate China sending billions of dollars to the US border. All of this spending is also for a potentially catastrophic war that the United States would certainly lose, as their own war games routinely show, all the while Taiwan would be completely destroyed in the process. For the reasons mentioned in this video, it is much more beneficial for China to just sit back and win. Waiting for a return to diplomacy is an infinitely more preferable alternative than launching a war. All economy, soft power, military, and geopolitical variables are trending heavily in their favor. They've positioned themselves as a world power that has shown much more respect for the United Nations and rule of law, and have carefully crafted partnerships with countries all around the world. It makes no sense to risk all of that unprovoked. It's not all about advanced chip manufacturing either. Western pundits believe that this conflict is purely a strategy about controlling TSMC or Taiwan's advanced chip-making capability. Obviously, it's a geopolitical consideration, but this conflict is 100% a result of the unresolved civil war and fully ending China's humiliation by foreign powers. It has always been a top priority of mainland China, decades before TSMC was a thing. In the mainland, Huawei has already closed the gap in computing power with the world's advanced chips by doing more with less with chip clustering. China has also created their own prototype of the highly advanced chip-making machines previously only found in Taiwan and the West. In the words of NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, China is nanoseconds behind in advanced chip-making. Within the next few years, China will undoubtedly lead this industry, making the strategic relevance of Taiwan's chip-making a tertiary consideration instead of the driving force that Western pundits believe it to be. The unique geopolitical importance of TSMC is also becoming increasingly irrelevant.
Under the Biden administration, TSMC received a $6 billion grant, and that encouraged them to build $65 billion. So America gave TSMC 10% of the money to build here. And now you're seeing the power of Donald Trump's presidency, because TSMC, the greatest manufacturer of chips in the world, is coming to America with a $100 billion investment. And of course, that is backed by the fact that they can come here because they can avoid paying tariffs. So I want to congratulate CC Wei for bringing in this incredible $100 billion investment, but it's on the shoulders of our president, Donald Trump, which is why he's coming.
With the U.S. now nearly in control of Taiwan's chip industry and China closing the gap, there's a very real possibility that Taiwan would lose all strategic relevance to the U.S., and under Trump or any future president, the U.S. might cut off all support for the island in exchange for a favorable trade deal. Okay, if you shouldn't support U.S. intervention and flooding the region with weapons and military bases, then what should you advocate for? It's simple. The only solution to this issue is the peaceful reunification of Taiwan with the mainland. War should be out of the question. Not a single Chinese person should die over this matter on either side of the strait, or anyone for that matter. Mainland China obviously doesn't want to go to war either. They view the people on Taiwan as brothers and sisters, not enemies. The only way a war would be triggered is if the island declared independence, and the only way that would happen is if a reckless DPP government had the full backing and green light that the United States would support them. The United States has never been a force for diplomacy. It has a $1 trillion military budget and a military-industrial complex that directly profits off of war and works in tandem with US politicians. It is heavily incentivized to maintain a level of conflict, so it can frequently sell DPP leaders billions of dollars in weapons. Therefore, the only solution is to remove the US influence in the conflict entirely, not so that the mainland can invade. That should never happen, but so that dialogue and diplomacy can occur between the two sides unmolested. Now, to finally resolve this decades-long civil war, I, a random YouTuber, have proposed a 4-step resolution plan to the Taiwan conflict. First, peace at all costs, no matter what, at the very least a maintenance of the status quo as a starting point, never recklessly declaring independence as that would launch a war. Second, decolonize the island and demilitarize foreign policy. Cease cooperation with the U.S. military-industrial complex, stop receiving millions of dollars and marching orders from foreign NGOs, think tanks, governments, and APAC. Third, reopen dialogue and exchanges with the mainland, remove travel restrictions on Chinese nationals, and reinstate academic exchanges, remove trade barriers, and promote cross-border communication. 4. Over a series of negotiations, create a one-country, two-systems policy that appropriately takes into account the unique qualities of the island to the satisfaction of both parties. This is where the entire discussion should be located. Even if you are not convinced why reunification makes sense for Taiwan from the shared Chinese identity and the mainland's clear legal and historical right, it still does not change the outcome of this conclusion from a geopolitical standpoint. The People's Republic of China has a population of 1.4 billion and are completely united around their commitment to Taiwan as unquestionably a part of China. This is the geopolitical reality, and that will never change, and they will never give that up. As a result, we can only control the variable of how this conflict will be resolved, either diplomatically or militarily. That's it. In contrast to the mainland's very unified position that they will die for this, there's only a small minority of people wanting independence on Taiwan of a population of only 23 million. With reopened diplomacy and communication between the strait, the population of those in the reunification camp would undoubtedly rise and win out. It's clear that the most rational outcome from both a game theory and geopolitical perspective that benefits Taiwan and world safety is a peaceful reunification between China and the island. Warmongering YouTubers, politicians, and think tanks treat the idea of war between China and the US over this issue like it's an inevitable thing that we must unquestionably do, when in reality, it's a completely avoidable world-ending disaster. These people are still pushing this nonsense narrative based on Western morality and a rules-based world order, while at the same time the US extrajudiciously executes fishermen in open water, kidnaps heads of state, and bombs numerous countries around the world. You can't make this stuff up. The one very hard baseline you should take away from this video is at the very least a removal of foreign interference on the island. Once that is gone and there's true diplomacy, we can really see where the cards lie. But we are not even close to that point, and until then, that should be your baseline before all further discussions.
我是希望说，两岸的领导人呢，都能够用智慧的方式来处理这么严重的事情。和则两利。如果发生战争呢，想想看，发生战争一定是在台湾本土，死的是谁？是台湾子民，不是大陆人，也不是美国人，也不是日本人。我希望政治人物呢，要好好的负责任，不要把我们推到这个深渊里面。台湾也不要一味的靠美国、日本来帮你撑腰。美国它是以利益，不是美国啦，全世界国家都一样，都是以自身的利益为至上，先谈自身的利益，然后呢再去讲别的。当台湾的利益已经比不上大陆，比不上美国所需要的利益的时候，是不是像阿富汗、像土耳其的库德族一样，随手就可以丢了？
The growing acknowledgement of the reality of modern China and Western lies cut through the manufactured idea of Taiwan as a separate entity like a knife through hot butter. Let's do everything in our power that those who desire war and violence do not get their way. If this video changed your worldview, you should definitely check out my video on Hong Kong and the narrative surrounding that city next. Please like and subscribe, and if you made it this far, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. These videos take super long time to make, and I'd really appreciate your support. As always, the written form of this video is also on my Substack. See you guys in the next video. Peace.
看完这段内容，其实有一个逻辑非常清晰：台湾问题复杂，但底线从来没变过，它是中国的一部分，这是历史、现实、国际格局共同形成的事实。真正让局势紧张的，从来不是两岸本身，而是不断被放大的对抗情绪以及外部力量的介入。所以，与其被各种战争叙事带节奏，不如看清一件更本质的事。 谁在推动对抗？谁在制造焦虑？谁又在从中获利？老美从来不缺朋友，但做老美的朋友通常是需要拿命来填的。看看现在的乌克兰，恭喜他们成功试用了美国提供的绞肉机 VIP 套餐，而现在这套沾着血的设备正在向台海包邮发货。华盛顿那帮西装革履的战争贩子，他们才不在乎你用的是简体字还是繁体字，不在乎你们吃的是卤肉饭还是热干面。 他们只在乎这根名为台湾的火柴，能不能在点燃自己之后，稍微烫伤一下中国大陆的手指头。只要能延缓中国超越美国的脚步，把一整个岛炸成焦土，在他们眼里，也就是五角大楼财报上一个极其划算的百分比罢了。当你把这个问题想明白，很多看似复杂的局势，其实就没那么难理解了。